The moon called Dora 7 circled a cold red giant like a lonely pebble around a fire. Its thin mist smelled of iron, and thorn trees creaked under a dim sky. On most nights the only sounds were wind and the low calls of hunting beasts. Tonight, a new noise joined them, the crackle of a burning shuttle that had fallen from orbit. Pieces of hull lay scattered like dull coins, and sparks drifted into the dark air before they died. Inside the largest chunk of wreckage, a little alien girl crouched behind a snap seat frame. Her skin was pale violet, her black eyes wide with fear. She was 6 seasons old, and her name was Kala, though no one here knew that name. A silver bracelet on her thin wrist sent a faint distress pulse every 10 seconds, a whisper begging the stars for help. Outside, claws scraped against metal, and Kala covered her mouth so the monsters would not hear her sobs dot far above the surface. A patrol craft slipped along its lonely route. The ship belonged to the Frontier Ranger Service, and inside sat Jack Taylor, the only human assigned to this forgotten sector. He was running a routine sweep when his console blinked with a broken thread of rescue code. Jack leaned closer, rubbed tired eyes, and listened. The signal was faint yet steady, the stubborn beat of a life refusing to quit. He set his little ship into a steep drop toward the moon. Flames licked the patrol craft as it punched through thin clouds. Jack landed on a flat ledge of stone, engines snarling at the cold air. He grabbed a rifle, a med kit, into flares, then stepped into the night. The ground was soft dust over rock, and every step sent up great puffs that glowed in his lamp. Distant roars rolled over the ridge line. They sounded hungry. The wreck lay half a kilometer away, shining where heat still lived in twisted hull plates. Jagged beams stuck up like broken ribs, and something large moved among them. Yellow eyes reflected Jack's beam for a breath before sliding back into shadow. His heart kicked faster. He switched the rifle to stun, raised it, and advanced. Boots, light and quiet on the dust dot inside the wreck. Kyle stared at a hairline crack above her head. Shapes passed outside, noses sniffing for blood. She remembered the crash, the blinding sparks, the sudden silence, and the grown-ups who never moved again. Now she was alone with sparking machines and beasts that clawed for entry. When a heavy footstep thumped inside the cabin, she curled tighter, sure a monster had found her at last. Jack eased under a torn hatch and swept his lamp across the cabin. He saw bodies strapped in ruined seats, but no living soul until tiny fingers trembled behind the console. "Easy," he said in a calm, low voice. The child flinched. He showed empty palms, then pointed to his chest. "Friend." A howl rose outside, nearer than before. A metal groaned under a heavy claw. No time for slow talk. He slid the rifle strap across his shoulder and reached down. Kayla's big eyes met his, still wet with tears. He smiled, soft and steady, then lifted her with gentle care. She weighed almost nothing. A crash echoed in the corridor as a beast forced its head through a side panel. Jack fired one blue stun bolt. The flash filled the cabin with cold light. Shielding Kyle with his body, he turned and ran. Broken sheets of hull rang under his boots. As he sprinted across open ground, several smaller predators bounded after him, claws sparking on stone. He fired 2 warning shots. The animals slowed but did not stop. Dust swirled around his ankles, making each breath dry. A low branch whipped his calf, slicing fabric and skin. But he kept running, holding Kyle tight while she buried her face in his jacket. A ridge of black rock rose ahead. Jack scrambled up worn grooves cut by ancient water and reached a flat shelf wide enough to breathe. He set Kyle down, knelt, and checked her for wounds. She had a small scrape on her cheek and a bruise on her shoulder. Nothing worse. He offered a sip of water. She drank, eyes never leaving his. Jack broke a tiny bar in half. "Chocolate," he said. Kyle tasted it, surprised by the sweet rush, and managed a shaky smile. Stars wheeled overhead while the planet's shadows spread over the moon. Below the ridge, glowing eyes gathered dozens waiting for deeper darkness. Kyle pointed at her bracelet and then toward the east, tracing a line across the dust. Jack understood enough. A map was stored inside that metal band, maybe showing tunnels or shelter. He nodded. He tapped his chest, then hers, then pointed the same way. together. The night wind grew colder. Jack checked his rifle's charge for stun rounds left, not enough for a pack. He tightened his straps and lifted Kala onto his back. She wrapped small arms around his neck. He rose, felt the throb in his cut leg, and pushed it aside. The beasts roared below, furious that their hunt was slipping away. Jack whispered, "Not tonight," and started along the ridge toward distant hills, guided by a fading beacon. A child's brave heart, and the stubborn human promise that no one should be left to die among monsters. Jack moved slowly along the ridge, carrying Kala on his back. The wind bit at his cheeks and tugged at his jacket. Twilight had long faded, leaving only soft stars overhead. Each step hissed on loose dust. He kept one hand on his rifle and the other on Kala's small form. She held tight against his neck. Her silver bracelet pulsed faintly with hope and fear. Jack could feel its gentle throb. He watched the horizon for any sign of dawn. Night still reigned. Cold and dark. Kala pressed her face into Jack's shoulder. She could hear low growls from far below. The beasts circled the foot of the ridge. Their roars echoed across the valleys. Jack tightened his grip and whispered, "Stay quiet." The words were rough but clear. Kala lay still, breathing soft. The sounds of claws on rock grew nearer. Jack scanned the darkness with his lamp. Each glare revealed shifting eyes. He loaded the last flare into his pack. Jack pointed ahead with his free hand. Kala looked where he pointed. They moved in slow steps toward a broken arch of stone. It marked old mining ruins. Inside, shadowed walls rose like silent giants. Jack hoped it might hide them. She nodded once, and he felt brave. The ruins were half buried in dust. Each beam rattled as wind passed through. Jack carried her under the archway. Their boots stirred up old sand. Beyond the arch lay a deep ravine. Its dark mouth yawned between jagged rocks. Mist curled up from the depths. Jack knelt on the edge and set Kala down. She watched the drop with wide eyes. He tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve. He tied it around her leg as a guide. Then he attached the other end to his belt. The plan was simple. He would lower her first. She would cross on a narrow ledge. He would follow. Kala inched across the ledge like a small spider. Jack held the rope tight. One slip would send her down into the abyss. She reached the far side and paused. Jack gave a soft hum to calm her. She continued until she stood beside him. Then he stepped onto the ledge. The stone crumbled under his boot. He froze and shifted his weight. Gravel tumbled away, but he did not fall. Kala's eyes widened and she let out a small sigh. As they pressed on, Jack taught Kala new words. He pointed at a rock and said rock. Then he pointed at himself and said Jack. Kala touched his name tag and repeated Jack. Her accent was soft and curious. Jack felt a warmth in his chest. The chase and danger faded for seconds. He joined her hand in his and said friend. Kala pressed her hand into his and said her name. Jack did not know the sound, but he felt it meant trust. Dawn still lay far behind the hills, but they saw a faint glow ahead. It came from a narrow slit between two rocks. Chains and gears marked an old door. Survival tunnels had once run under this place. Kala pointed at the chains. She tapped her bracelet and nodded. Jack set down his pack. He pulled a small wrench from his kit. The gears clicked as he worked. At last the door creaked open. Cold air spilled out like a sigh. Inside was total darkness. Jack lit his lamp and shadows fled. The tunnel walls glimmered with mineral streaks. He slung Kala's small pack onto her shoulders. She peered into the black corridor. Dust motes danced in the lamp beam. Jack checked his rifle and water canteen. He whispered, "Stay close." Kala nodded and stepped after him. Each footfall echoed in the stone hall. They descended deeper together. Each step brought them farther from death, but closer to hope. Jack and Kala moved deeper into the tunnel, their lamp beams cutting through the thick dark. The walls were slick with damp and shine like wet stone. Every footstep echoed and made shadows dance. Jack kept his rifle ready in one hand and held Kala's wrist with the other. She stepped carefully, her small boots kicking up dust. The air smelled of electricity and old metal. Jack thought it might be safe for a moment, but he knew danger could come from any corner. After a few minutes, The tunnel widened into a chamber. Jack swept his lamp across the room. Old machines lay half buried in rubble. Pipes ran along the walls, some broken, some still humming with low power. A soft blue glow pulsed in one corner. Jack recognized the coolant line. He crouched and checked. The label, Medgel Reservoir. He smiled and signaled Kala to stay back, gently. He cleared debris and opened the seal. Inside was a small vial of healing gel. Jack dabbed a bit of gel on his wounded leg from the earlier cliff. The sting was mild, and the gel closed the cut almost at once. Kala watched with wide eyes. Jack tore a small piece of cloth from his sleeve and wrapped Kayla's scratches with care. She giggled when the gel cooled her arm. Jack showed her the word heal on his hand, then tapped the gel. Kala repeated heal in her soft voice. The words sounded strange but warm and kind. They explored the chamber's edges. Broken drone parts lay on the floor. Jack gathered severed cables and mangled circuit boards into his pack. He hoped to use them later for light or to send a signal. Kyle pointed at a tall door at the far end. Its surface was smooth metal, etched with strange symbols. In the center was a crest, a circle with 3 radiating lines. Kayla's eyes lit up. She tapped her bracelet and then tapped the crest. Jack knelt beside her and traced the lines with his finger. He nodded, unsure what it meant. Kyle spoke half a sentence in her own tongue. Jack shook his head. He held up a finger to say one moment, then tapped his ear and said listen. He pressed his lamp against the crest. A soft click echoed. The door slid open on ancient rails, revealing a small room beyond that inside the small room. A console hummed, screens flickered with pale green lines. Jack found a data reader and plugged in a drone cable he had saved. The screen lit up. Maps of the tunnel network appeared. Each quarter was drawn as a thin line. Twists and turns going deep under the ground. Jack studied it. He saw their current location marked by a small dot. He tapped the dot with his finger and drew a path to the surface dot. Meanwhile, Kyle looked at drawers built into the walls. She slid one open and found rows of sealed packs. Each pack held dried food rations and water gels. Jack helped her carry a few. They each took one ration. Kyle unwrapped a pack and passed it to Jack. They sat on an old crate and ate in silence. The food tasted dry but kept their strength. Jack drank a sip of water gel and offered the rest to Kala. She smiled and drank until the gel was gone. Jack stood and wiped his mouth. He held up the map and pointed along a long corridor leading upward. Kala tapped her bracelet again, as if to confirm. Jack tapped the map path and said this way. Kala whispered a word in her language. Jack asked what? She pointed to the console screen and then to the tunnel ahead. Jack nodded. He lowered the map into his pack and secured the vial of Medgel dot as they turned to leave. The console beeped. Jack froze. A red light flashed on the screen. He leaned in to read the text. Warning. High threat level detected. Hostiles inbound. Jack's heart pounded. He tapped the screen again, but the map view returned. Outside the smaller room, the corridor was silent. He crept forward, rifle raised. Careful not to trip on cables. Suddenly, distant roars echoed through the tunnels. Jack pressed Kala against the wall, covering her ears. The sound grew closer, like sounds of heavy bodies moving in a herd. Dust stirred at the tunnel entrance. Jack shone his lamp down the corridor. Two glowing eyes stared back. Small beasts of the surface had followed them in, drawn by power hum. Jack whispered hide and pointed to a narrow side passage. They slipped into the side passage. The walls were rough and low. Jack crouched and slid through first, then reached back to pull Colin. Once inside, they crept along in darkness. The side passage bent sharply. Jack checked his map in his pack, found their current dot, and saw another corridor leading upward marked vent shaft. He tapped the drawing and whispered vent. Kyle repeated the word in her soft voice. Jack shone his lamp on a vent cover. Screws held it in place. He took his small wrench and turned each screw. Kyle watched, fascinated. Jack lifted the cover and pushed it aside. A ladder led up into a grate. He checked his rifle and bag, then lifted Kala. She climbed first, then he followed. At the top, They emerged into a hollow space above the vents. Jack peered down through the grate. Metal pipes ran across the ceiling, and the tunnel below was empty again. He spotted a ladder on the far wall leading to a sealed hatch. He tapped his chest and then tapped the hatch. Kala understood and pointed at the hatch. Jack smiled. He put Kala on his shoulders. She reached up and slid the hatch open. Cold air from above rushed in. They climbed through and found themselves in another chamber. Its ceiling was curved like a half shell. Lights flickered overhead. A panel on one side was broken, but a hole let a beam of moonlight enter. Jack felt it on his face and smiled. He tapped his rifle and said safe. Kala nodded and touched the moonbeam with her hand. The beam danced on her violet skin and made her smile. Jack looked at Kala and said, "We will go home." Kala touched his shoulder and said, "Home." He returned the gesture. Together, they moved toward a distant stairway that led upward. Jack checked his watch. Dawn was still hours away, but he felt hope well in his chest. Kayla's small hand held his. He wrapped his other arm around her and whispered, "Stay close." Together, they climbed toward light and safety, leaving the hidden secrets of the tunnels behind. Jack and Kala moved farther into the curved chamber. The broken hatch lay behind them, sealing off the beast that had chased them. The walls arched overhead like ribs of an old creature. Moonlight fell through cracks in the ceiling, painting the dust in silver bands. Jack set Kala on her feet and patted her hand. She touched the moonbeam and grinned. Jack smiled back. He checked his watch. Night was deep, but they had hours before dawn. He knew they needed a plan to keep the monsters at bay until sunrise. Jack turned to a pile of old supplies stacked against one wall. Dusty crates held tools, empty canisters, and metal scraps. Jack swept his lamp over the pile. He spotted black cylinders stamped with faded labels, pulse mines. He lifted one and showed Kala the ridged edge. She reached out and touched it, fascinated. Jack knelt and drew to more from the crate. Then he set them on the floor. Kala knelt beside him and watched as he worked. Her eyes were wide but eager to help. Jack rummaged through his satchel and found broken drone batteries and severed cables. He plugged wires into the pulse mines, testing each connection. Kala picked up a length of wire and offered it to him. Jack nodded and looped it into the first mine. He fastened the second cable to a trigger plate made of scrap metal. Kala mimicked his movements, pressing a short beam against a mine to see how it fit. Jack showed her how to latch the safety catch. She clicked it into place, proud of her small hands. While they worked, Jack spoke softly to Kala. He tapped his chest and said Jack, then pointed to her and said Kala. She repeated both names with a gentle voice. Jack drew a heart shape in the dust and tapped twice, meaning friend. Kala leaned forward and traced the same shape. Jack's chest felt warm. He asked home, pointing at his ship's image on his map. Kala nodded, eyes bright, and tapped her bracelet. Jack understood. They needed to reach Jack's ship before monsters found them. As Jack finished wiring the third mine, Kala looked at him with a solemn expression. She brushed a strand of violet hair from her face and spoke in her tongue. Jack shook his head, but Kala tapped the mine and then her bracelet. Jack realized she was warning him. Something big was coming. He patted her shoulder and said, "Plan." He drew a simple map in the dust. He marked the chamber entrance, the curved tunnel, and their ship's beacon beyond a crater rim. Then he drew 3 small circles where each mine would go. Jack and Kala placed the pulse mines along the chamber wall near the hatch. Each mine sat hidden behind a rocky outcrop. Jack drove metal stakes through the trigger plates and tightened wires along the floor. Kala crawled ahead to test each mine's position. She tapped on the wall and looked back with a thumbs up. Jack smiled and nodded. He labeled each mine in dust with a small dot. Kala imitated, marking dots near the first and last mine. The plan was clear. When the beast charged through, the mines would stun the first wave and slow the rest after they set the final mine. Jack checked his rifle's charge. 3 stun bolts left. Not enough for a pack. He tapped his rifle and shook his head. Kala reached into her pack and drew out a single flare. Jack smiled and took it. He placed it in his belt for a last signal. Kala tapped her helmet and then pointed at Jack. He patted his head and mouthed ready. Kala gripped her small pack straps and nodded. Together, they backed away from the mines toward a rocky alcove. The chamber lights flickered as the tunnel walls hummed. Distant roars shook loose dust from overhead pipes. Jack drew several symbols in the dust. One meant wait, another hide, and the last go. Kala traced the same symbols with her finger. Together they memorized the signals. Jack held Kayla's hand and whispered, "Ready?" Kayla's small hand felt safe in his. The air grew tense. The first monster rumble came from deep under the floor. A low vibration ran through the chamber. Jack braced himself behind the last outcrop. Kyle crouched beside him, her eyes wide but determined. The first three beasts burst through the hatch, their scales glinting in moonlight. Jack counted. 1, 2, 3. As they charged, Jack pressed the dust symbol for boom. A pulse mine detonated, sending a wave of energy that lifted the small beasts off their feet. They crashed into the wall. Dazed, Jack fired a stun bolt into the air. The second mine ignited with a thump. More beasts faltered and fell. Kala watched the monsters topple. She reached out and patted Jack's arm. He nodded. The last mine would finish the job. A deep growl echoed as the alpha beast approached. Larger than the rest, it wore scars across its neck. It bucked at the pulse wave and charged. Jack held up his hand for silence. Kyle pressed her palm against his. He squeezed gently. Together they waited for the alpha. When it leaped over the second mine, Jack whispered go and pressed the flare. The third mine sparked, scaring the beast back. The alpha recoiled, eyes glowing. It sniffed at the air and roared. Jack and Kala slipped from the alcove and ran for the curved exit tunnel. They moved fast, boots kicking up dust. Behind them, the monsters roared in confusion and pain. Jack did not look back. He held Kala close and whispered, "This way." Kala stepped on his heels, trusting him completely. They reached the exit as the alpha regained its balance and charged after them. Jack darted through the archway and turned to help Kala through. Kala slipped and nearly fell, but Jack caught her arm. They rolled into the open air together. Jack pressed the flare again, bright and loud. The alpha halted at the tunnel mouth, wary of the light. It growled low but did not follow. Jack guided Kala to a rocky ledge. They paused to catch their breath. Jack looked at Kala and said, "We did it." Kala smiled, her black eyes shining. She hugged him. Jack rested his head on hers. Together they watched the beast skulk below. Jack checked the sky. Dawn still lay beyond the crater rim. He tapped his watch. Soon, rescue would arrive. He patted Kayla's back and said, "Almost home." Kala touched his face and whispered home. Jack led her up the ridge, each step lighter than before. Behind them, the tunnel entrance sealed with moonlit dust and silence. And their bond grew stronger, ready for whatever sunrise would bring. Jack and Kala stood on the dusty rim of the crater as the first pale light of dawn crept over the rocks. Jack shaded his eyes and pointed to an old mining outpost below. Broken pipes and a squat metal building marked the spot. He tapped his wrist. Beacon and said ship. Then he tapped the outpost and said plan. Kala nodded, her black eyes bright with courage. They dropped down the slope to the outpost floor. Inside the building, a cold reactor core sat silent. Its coolant lines curled like veins along the walls. Jack knelt by a heavy valve handle and checked its label, cryovent. He turned and whispered to Kala, "We lure alpha here. You open. Valve, I trigger vent." Kala repeated open, then tapped her bracelet. Jack smiled. He handed her a small flare. She held it tight. Outside, Jack unraveled 3 lengths of wire from his pack. He ran each wire from the outpost door to rocky perches spaced along the path, back toward the crater mouth. At each perch, he set a simple shock trap made from drone cables in his last stun bolt. Kala watched and helped, clipping wires and holding them in place. The traps hummed quietly. Ready. Jack then placed the flare at the edge of the path. He struck its igniter. A dull red glow pulsed at the start of the wire line. Signal. He told Kala. She repeated signal. They stepped back into the outpost doorway, and crouched out. A low roar came from the rocks. The alpha beast emerged under a broken arch. It scanned the outpost, nostrils flaring. Jack raised his hand and tapped the rim of the flare. It flared red and hissed. Drawing the alpha's gaze, the beast snarled and bounded down the path, its heavy claws kicking up dust. As the alpha passed the first trap wire, a shock bolt snapped and sent sparks through its fur. It stumbled but kept running. The second trap hit its flank. Pain flashed in its eyes. It roared louder and charged on, its focus on the flare's glow at the outpost door. Jack and Kyle stayed silent in the shadows as the beast closed in. At the last moment, Kyle pressed the valve handle. A rush of cold gas hissed into the open air. The temperature plunged as thick white vapor rolled toward the path. Jack pressed the switch on his belt. An electric hum charged the cryo vent system. The alpha reached the outpost door just as the cold wave hit. Its massive shoulders froze crusty white. Ice formed on its muzzle and paws. It slammed against the door, but the cold grip held it fast. Jack squeezed his rifle trigger. The stun bolt struck the frozen beast's leg. It shuddered and collapsed in a cloud of ice shards. Jack exhaled and checked Colin. She grinned and pointed at the beast. He nodded. Then the ground trembled. Cracks ran along the outpost floor as the old reactor shuddered under the sudden venting. Jack grabbed Kayla's hand. "Run," he said. They dashed through the outpost door. Rocks fell behind them as the building groaned. Poisons of dust filled the air. Jack and Kala slipped down the slope toward the crater mouth. The alpha's roars of confusion echoed in the distance. Ice flakes sparkled on the ground. At the crater edge, Jack tapped his wrist beacon. His ship's autopilot responded, engines whined above. A patrol craft descended in a swirl of dust. Jack lifted Kala into his arms. She wrapped her small arms around his neck. The ship's ramp opened in a hiss. Inside the cabin, the heat was welcome. Jack set Kala on a seat and high-fived her gently. She laughed, a clear sound that filled the cramped space. Jack closed the outpost door behind them. The walls trembled once more before falling silent. The ship lifted off as the sun finally rose over door 7. Jack and Kala pressed their faces to the small window. Below, the frozen alpha stood trapped in ice, a monument to their daring. Jack tapped Kayla's shoulder and said, "We did it." Kala put her tiny hand on his and said, "Home." The ship climbed toward the stars. Jack checked the patrol logs. Soon, the galaxy would know how a human ranger and a little alien girl faced monsters, outwitted a beast, and found a new family in each other. Dawn had come, and with it, a promise that no one was left to die among monsters again. Jack sat beside Kala in the warm cabin as the patrol craft hummed through the thin atmosphere. Outside, the red dawn of Door 7 glowed like embers in the sky. Kala pressed her forehead to the window and watched dust scatter below. Jack's hand rested on her small back. He felt her breathing slow as she grew calm. Inside, the air was soft and smelled of engine oil and heated blankets. Jack offered a med gel pack. Kala took it in both hands and nodded. He smiled and showed the word rest on his palm. Kala whispered rest and closed her eyes. Letting sleep come. Jack turned to the console and tapped the comm panel. A calm voice answered, "Ranger Taylor, report." Jack spoke in clear English. He told them about the crash, the monsters, the tunnel fight, and how Kala helped with maps and mines. The voice crackled with surprise and relief. Jack ended with, "We have the child safe." He paused and added, "She is alone. I will not leave her." The voice replied, "Understood. Prepare for transfer to orbit station." Jack switched off the comm and looked at Kayla sleeping. Form. He thought of her village, the people who left her, and his promise that no one would die alone. Hours later, the craft docked at Orion Frontier Station. Its walls were bright and full of signals. Rescue crews met them with soft lights and gentle questions. Kyle woke and saw new faces in white coats. She held Jack's hand tightly. A kind doctor checked her pulse and smiled. She spoke a few words in her tongue, and the doctor nodded, then said, "We understand." Jack stepped back as drones recorded the girl's vitals. Med gel dripped from a small cut on her wrist. Kala watched the machines with quick eyes. Jack patted her shoulder and said, "You are safe." Kala nodded, then pointed to the docking bay doors. News crews flooded the station as footage from Jack's ship appeared on all screens. The video showed a small girl trembling under claws, then the bright beams of stunned fire, and Jack carrying her from danger. People across worlds watched in wonder. Some cried at Kayla's brave eyes. Others cheered for Jack's courage. Channels debated the story for cycles. A headline read, "Ranger and girl hero duo prove human heart shines in darkest places." Jack stood among reporters but kept Kala behind him. She peeked over his shoulder and saw herself on a giant screen. She tapped her chest and said, "Kala." The crowd hushed and a gentle clap rose. Soon, the Galactic Council called Jack to speak about Kayla's fate. High voices spoke of aliens left to die, human duty, and cross-species bonds. Jack stood at the podium, Kala at his side. He spoke softly. "She showed me trust when she had none. She helped me save her people, though they left her. Today, I ask to adopt Kala. Let me be her family, and I will keep my promise. No one dies alone." The hall fell silent. Arguments came from some delegates. One said it was unusual. Another said it was right. Kala squeezed Jack's hand. When the vote came, lights changed to green. The council approved. Jack and Kala left the station in a small transport. He held her close as they entered a living pod filled with toys, clothes, and soft chairs. Kayla's eyes shone at the shirts with her name stitched in gentle thread. Jack helped her pick a cushion printed with earth trees. He showed her pictures of his home world, green fields and tall rivers. Kala touched the screens and whispered new words: earth, home, family. Jack nodded and said, "Welcome home, Kala." She looked up and gave him a small smile that reached her dark eyes. When they reached Jack's ranger ship, they saw a plaque added to the hull: duty, honor, compassion. Jack and Kala stood together as the engines roared to life. He held her hand as the stars stretched before them. Jack thought of all the lost signals waiting for help, of tunnels filled with secrets, and of one small girl who cried among monsters. He pressed Kayla's hand and said, "We will find them all." Kala looked up at the infinite sky and said, "Together." The ship lifted, carrying Ranger and Child into the galaxy, where no one would ever be left to die among monsters again.